pray for a life without enemies. You want everyone to approve of you. That is the fantasy of a weak man. Powerful men understand something darker. Enemies are not always a threat. Often, they are a weapon. Today, I will show you how to turn hatred, sabotage, and envy into discipline, leverage, and visible success. The average man panics when he realizes someone is against him. He complains, he spirals, he becomes emotional, he starts performing for approval. That is why he loses twice. First, he suffers the attack. Then he weakens himself in response. But the strategic man sees something else. He sees information. He sees friction. He sees a mirror that does not flatter him. Friends will often protect your feelings. Enemies will study your cracks. They will reveal where you are predictable, where you are insecure, where you still react too fast. That makes them dangerous, yes. But it also makes them useful. Because if you know how to think correctly, every insult becomes data. Every sabotage attempt becomes a stress test. Every act of envy becomes proof that your movement is being felt. And once you learn to convert that pressure into discipline, your enemies stop being a curse. They become the staircase. You pray for a life without enemies. You want approval. You want smooth roads. You want no resistance, no critics, no rivals, no one watching you with envy in their chest. That is the prayer of a weak man, because a man without enemies is usually a man without edge. A man without enemies has rarely threatened the status quo. He has not built enough. He has not refused enough. He has not risen high enough for anyone to feel his shadow. The powerful understand something most men never learn. Enemies are not always a curse. Often they are a weapon, not because they are kind, not because opposition feels good, but because hatred reveals, pressure sharpens, and resistance forces a man to become more dangerous than comfort ever could. So today, we are going to reverse the entire frame. You will stop seeing enemies as emotional burdens. You will stop seeing sabotage as a reason to spiral, and you will start seeing opposition for what it often is: information, fuel, proof, and a staircase built by the very people who wanted to bury you. Because the first thing you must understand is this: an enemy is often more valuable than a fake friend. A fake friend wants access without responsibility. He wants your presence, your energy, your loyalty, your time, but he does not want the burden of telling you the truth. He watches you get sloppy and says nothing. He watches your standards drop and says nothing. He watches you repeat the same weakness again and again, and instead of correcting you, he comforts you. Why? Because most people do not want your greatness. They want your convenience. They do not want to sharpen you. They want to keep you familiar. That is why weak men love comforting circles. They get to remain untested. They get applause without growth. They get emotional safety while their life quietly decays. But an enemy does not protect your ego. An enemy studies your pattern. He watches your reactions. He notices where you speak too much. He notices where you crave validation. He notices where your discipline disappears under pressure. He is looking for a crack. And that is exactly why he is useful. Because the man who hates you enough to study you is often giving you more truthful feedback than the man who claims to support you but never risks offending you. That is the gift of hatred. Hatred pays attention. Read that again in your mind. Hatred pays attention. Your enemy may not understand your whole soul. He may misread your motives. He may speak from envy, bitterness, or wounded pride. But in his obsession, he will often stumble onto something real, a weakness in your image, a gap in your execution, a habit that makes you predictable, an insecurity that makes you easy to provoke. And the average man wastes this gift. He hears criticism and becomes defensive. He hears mockery and becomes emotional. He hears disrespect and begins arguing with ghosts. He wants to be understood. That is his mistake. The strategic man does not ask, how do I make them like me? He asks, what are they seeing that I have not corrected yet? That question changes everything, because once you stop seeking comfort, you begin extracting value. You stop worshipping approval. You stop romanticizing false loyalty. You stop confusing support with softness. And you realize that some of the greatest upgrades in your life will not come from praise. They will come from pressure. But that still is not the most dangerous part, because the real power of an enemy is not just that he hates you. It is that he reveals you. Your friends will comfort your flaws. Your enemy will exploit them. That one truth should mature you overnight. A friend might say, you're fine. Don't be so hard on yourself. An enemy will say, he talks big, but he folds under pressure. A friend might say, ignore it. They're just jealous. An enemy will say, watch how emotional he gets when he is challenged. Now, listen carefully. Your enemy's tone may be poisonous. His intent may be dirty. His satisfaction may be petty. But buried inside the poison is often data, and disciplined men know how to separate signal from venom. That is what weak men cannot do. They consume the insult whole. They either believe all of it and collapse, or reject all of it and learn nothing. Both reactions are childish. The mature man extracts. He asks, is there a pattern here? Is this attack exposing a real vulnerability? Have I made myself too easy to read, too easy to trigger, too easy to delay, too easy to delay, too easy to bait into over-explaining? Because once a weakness is visible to an enemy, it is already expensive. Maybe they call you arrogant. Maybe what they really mean is that your delivery lacks precision. Maybe they call you soft. Maybe what they really discovered is that guilt still works on you. Maybe they call you fake. Maybe what they actually noticed is that your actions and your image are still not aligned. Do you see the shift? You are no longer reacting like prey. You are auditing like a commander. That is a different psychology. Imagine a man in business. Every time someone questions him publicly, he rushes in to defend himself. Paragraphs, voice notes, explanations, emotional clarifications. He thinks he is protecting his reputation. He is not. He is revealing that pressure controls him. His enemy learns something valuable, push here, and he leaks. Now imagine the other man. He sees the same attack. He feels the same heat. But he does not move like a wounded animal. He steps back. He studies the accusation. He asks what part is theater and what part is signal. Then he closes the gap quietly. Fewer words, better systems, stronger timing, cleaner execution. Weeks later, the weakness is gone. That is power. Not arguing, not performing pain, not demanding fairness from unfair people. Power is taking hostile information and using it to become harder to hit next time. And once you learn that, something cold begins to happen inside you. You stop fearing opposition so much, because now every enemy becomes a forced mirror. Not a pleasant one, not a fair one, but often a useful one. And that is where the average man falls behind. He wants protection from friction. The strategic man wants revelation from friction. Because once your enemies stop being personal, they start becoming practical. And when that shift happens, a more dangerous skill becomes possible. You can take the emotional energy they throw at you and convert it into discipline. And that is exactly why the next rule matters more than the first. Most men do not lose because they are attacked. They lose because they do not know what to do with the attack. They absorb it emotionally. They carry it in their chest. They replay it at night. They fantasize about proving people wrong. They burn energy in anger, in imaginary arguments, in revenge speeches that never leave the mind. That is wasted fire. Fire is useful only when it is contained. This is where the strategic man separates himself from the emotional man. He does not deny the sting. He feels it. He just refuses to spill it. He converts it. That is the next law. Your enemy gives you emotional charge. Your job is to turn that charge into structure, not rage, not drama, not obsession. Structure, more training, cleaner routines, better timing, sharper standards, longer focus, less noise. That is energy conversion. A weak man hears disrespect and wants to talk. A dangerous man hears disrespect and upgrades his life in silence. That is why some men stay stuck for years. They are addicted to the feeling of being wronged. It makes them feel deep. It makes them feel special. It gives them a tragic little identity. But pain that is not converted becomes vanity. And vanity is expensive, because now the enemy is still living in your mind rent-free, while your body is undisciplined, your craft is inconsistent, your money is unstable, and your name is still too fragile. You think you are at war with them. You are not. You are at war with your own inability to channel pressure correctly. This is why hatred can become rocket fuel in the right hands. When someone underestimates you, you have two options. You can chase relief, or you can build capacity. Chasing relief means posting, ranting, proving, explaining, seeking witnesses, looking for sympathy. Building capacity means waking up earlier, refining the work, tightening your speech, controlling access, getting your emotions under command, and becoming impossible to shake. One path gives you temporary comfort. The other path changes your rank. And rank is what they notice. Let me say something most men need to hear. Your enemies do not care about your feelings. They care about your weakness. So when you respond with emotional leakage, you are feeding the very machine that wants to reduce you. Every outburst teaches them your buttons. Every panic teaches them your tempo. Every explanation teaches them where your need for approval still lives. This is why silence is not suppression. Silence is redirection. You take the impulse to react, and you reroute it into the body, into the work, into the plan, into repetition, into skill, into visible progress. That is what mature aggression looks like. Cold, useful, controlled. Picture a man who gets mocked behind his back. The average response is immediate. He confronts, he complains, he asks who said what. He tries to correct the narrative by force. Now the room sees a man ruled by reaction. But the strategic response is darker. He notes the disrespect. He notes who allowed it. He notes what weakness made him an easy target. Then he vanishes into correction. He upgrades his body. He upgrades his results. He upgrades his standards. He stops being casually available. He stops broadcasting his insecurity. He stops needing to be included in every room. Months later, the same people feel the shift before they can explain it. That is conversion. Their negativity became your discipline. That is why you must stop asking, how do I stop people from hating? Wrong question. The real question is, how much output can I create from pressure? Because that determines whether hate weakens you or forges you. And once you master that, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Friction is not always a sign you are failing. Sometimes friction is proof you are rising. If no one is opposing you, you may not be moving fast enough. That line offends comfortable men because they want growth without tension, success without visibility, power without envy, movement without resistance. But gravity does not work that way. The higher you rise, the more force you must withstand. The more visible you become, the more people project onto you. The more disciplined you become, the more undisciplined people resent you. The more standards you build, the more weak people call you cold. That is not a mistake. That is the tax of elevation. Opposition often appears the moment your movement becomes undeniable. Not when you are invisible, not when you are average, Not when you are blending in and making everyone comfortable. No, opposition appears when your existence starts creating contrast. Your discipline exposes their excuses. Your silence exposes their neediness. Your standards expose their lack of self-respect. Your progress exposes the years they wasted. And people do not always respond to contrast with admiration. Sometimes they respond with bitterness. That bitterness becomes gossip, undermining, subtle sabotage, passive disrespect, smiling faces with concealed hostility. Good. Now you know something important. Your movement is being felt. A man building nothing rarely attracts serious resistance. No one tries to dim a candle that is already off. So do not panic every time you meet friction. Study it. Is it random, or is it the natural pressure created by visible movement? This is where many men betray themselves. They start rising, then the first wave of opposition hits, and they interpret resistance as a sign to shrink. They tone themselves down, they dilute their voice, they lower their standards, they become agreeable again just to reduce tension. In other words, they trade growth for acceptance. That is cowardice dressed as diplomacy. A strategic man understands that not all peace is valuable. Some peace is purchased through self-betrayal. Some peace is purchased by becoming smaller than your potential, by hiding your edge, by muting your ambition, by pretending not to see what you are capable of. That kind of peace is poison. You should be far more afraid of a life with no resistance than a life with meaningful resistance. Because sometimes the absence of opposition means the absence of impact. You are not disrupting anything, not building anything, not threatening anyone's comfort, not stepping beyond the level where weak people still feel superior. That is not safety. That is stagnation. But there is another advantage to opposition, and it is one that impatient men almost always miss. Your enemies often destroy themselves without your help. Arrogant enemies are useful because they overplay their hand. They are too emotional to stay strategic, too eager to humiliate, too hungry to be seen winning, too confident in the short term. And ego always leaks. This is why patience is such a brutal weapon. Weak men think power means striking back immediately. It does not. Immediate retaliation often reveals insecurity. It tells the room you were wounded. It tells the enemy he reached your nerves. It drags you into the mud where the petty feel at home. But when you stay composed, something else happens. Your enemy keeps performing. He talks too much. He smirks too early. He escalates when no escalation was needed. He becomes theatrical, and in his need to damage you, he reveals himself. That is how people dig their own hole. They start with a subtle insult, then they get bolder, then more reckless, then more public. And because they think they are exposing you, they fail to notice they are exposing their own envy, instability, and lack of discipline. Time is merciless to people who cannot regulate themselves. All you have to do is give them room. Not unlimited room, not naive room, controlled room, enough rope for character to speak. Imagine two men in the same field. One is calm, measured, focused on results. The other keeps taking shots, making scenes, trying to win attention through noise. At first, some people may enjoy the spectacle. Noise is entertaining to the shallow, but over time, patterns become reputations. The calm man starts to look solid. The erratic man starts to look dangerous in the wrong way. Unstable, petty, unreliable. This is why restraint is not passivity, it is strategic patience. You are letting the camera stay on long enough for the truth to reveal itself. And here is the part emotional men cannot tolerate. Sometimes the best move is to do less publicly and more privately. No long defense, no revenge performance, no desperate correction campaign, just records, memory, adjustment, positioning, execution. Let them speak out of turn. Let them overreach. Let them show the room who they are. Because once an enemy is drunk on his own arrogance, he stops hiding his nature. And that is when the contrast becomes lethal. Because in the end, the market, the room, the audience, the tribe, whatever world you move in, does not just watch conflict. It watches composure. And that is exactly where the next battle is won. In the end, people do not just watch conflict. They watch contrast. And contrast is where silent men win. Because most enemies destroy their own image long before they ever damage yours. They become emotional, petty, obsessed, predictable. You do not have to beat them at chaos. You beat them by refusing to join it. That is the contrast play. They act erratic. You stay measured. They try to provoke. You stay unreadable. They perform for attention. You execute in silence. And the room notices. Not always immediately, not always in the moment. But over time, composure becomes evidence. This is the part weak men misunderstand. They think victory is about having the best comeback, the sharpest insult, the final word. But the final word is overrated. What matters is final perception. And perception is shaped less by what you say in conflict and more by how you carry yourself under pressure. Anyone can look calm when life is easy. Anyone can seem noble when no one is disrespecting them. Anyone can sound wise when they are not being challenged. But pressure reveals rank. When an enemy becomes loud and you remain still, the contrast grows. When they become messy and you become more precise, the contrast grows. When they try to drag you into emotion and you answer with cleaner execution, the contrast becomes brutal. Because now, the world is seeing two things at once. Their instability, your control, their pettiness, your standard, their noise, your weight. And weight always beats noise in the long run. Think about it in any arena, business, social circles, leadership, competition, even family dynamics. One man is always explaining himself, defending himself, trying to correct every rumor, every look, every slight. The other man is watching, adjusting, and continuing to build. Who looks stronger? The one fighting for interpretation, or the one making interpretation irrelevant through results? Exactly. That is the contrast play. You do not win by becoming more dramatic than your enemy. You win by becoming more disciplined than the chaos around you. There is a small example that explains this perfectly. Two men are competing in the same market. One starts throwing indirect shots, sarcastic comments, passive-aggressive posts, little emotional flares meant to bait a reaction. The other says nothing. He improves the product, sharpens the brand, tightens his routine, delivers better work, speaks less, misses less. At first, the petty man thinks silence means weakness. Then the market starts responding. Clients notice who feels stable. Partners notice who feels mature. Observers notice who looks focused and who looks threatened. And suddenly the petty man has created the very comparison that ruins him. He wanted attention. He created contrast, and contrast crowned the calmer man. That is why composure is not a personality trait. It is a social weapon. It lets other people convict your enemy without you needing to make a speech. It lets the reckless reveal themselves. It lets the impatient expose themselves. It lets the bitter collapse under the weight of their own behavior. Your job is not to interrupt that process. Your job is to stay clean while they become obvious. That takes discipline, because when someone disrespects you, your ego will beg to respond. Your pride will want to strike. Your emotions will tell you silence is surrender. It is not. Not when the silence is backed by movement. Not when the silence is backed by standards. Not when the silence is backed by outcomes. That is the line weak men miss. Silence by itself is not power. Silence with execution is power. And once you understand that, you begin to see the final truth. The ultimate revenge is not humiliation. It is irreversible elevation, not getting even, getting beyond reach, not making them feel your pain, making them witness your growth. This is where childish minds get exposed. They hear the word revenge and imagine destruction. Outbursts, public victories, a dramatic moment where the enemy finally gets what he deserves. That is fantasy. Real power is colder than that. Real power does not need theater. The ultimate revenge is becoming so solid, so sharp, so effective that their hatred becomes part of your origin story and nothing more. They wanted access to your emotions. Now they cannot read you. They wanted control over your state. Now they cannot move you. They wanted to delay your rise. Now they are forced to watch it. That is revenge at the highest level. Not because you stayed obsessed with them, but because you outgrow the need to answer them at all. And that is the final transformation. At the beginning, the average man sees an enemy and feels fear, then anger, then self-doubt, then obsession. But the strategic man sees an enemy and thinks differently. What are they revealing? What are they teaching? What weakness must be closed? What emotion must be mastered? What standard must be raised? What skill must now become undeniable? This is the identity shift. You are no longer trying to live a life where nobody dislikes you. You are building a life where opposition becomes expensive for the people who choose it. Because now you are not soft enough to manipulate with guilt, not emotional enough to provoke on command, not needy enough to chase closure, not undisciplined enough to waste pain. Now you use everything: praise, pressure, envy, resistance, silence, disrespect. Everything becomes material, everything becomes a blade, and the man who can do that is nearly impossible to stop. Not because he is loved, not because he is lucky, not because the world became fair, but because he learned the darkest useful truth of all. The enemy can attack your peace. He can test your patience. He can expose your weak spots. He can even force you into painful seasons. But if you know what you are doing, he can also help build the very man he was trying to destroy. That is strategic reversal. That is power. That is why your haters, your rivals, your doubters, and your saboteurs can become your greatest weapon, only if you stay disciplined enough to use them. So do not pray for a life with no enemies. Pray for the eyes to read them correctly, the restraint to not react foolishly, the discipline to convert pressure into output, and the ambition to rise so high that their hatred becomes the staircase beneath your feet. That is the standard. And if you understand that, type this in the comments. I turn opposition into power. Subscribe if you are ready to outlast everyone who doubted you. Because once you see enemies correctly, you stop fearing resistance, and you start using it.